listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans. This is your Overwatch League Daily episode for March 7th, 2018. Today, I'm joined by Overwatch League analyst Josh Sideshow Wilkinson to discuss some of the bigger topics surrounding Stage 2 going on right now. We went a little long in this interview, so I actually split it up into two parts. You got part one today, and we'll have part two to you tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started with Sideshow. All right, I am here. It's been a while, but we are back with Overwatch League analyst and kind of been on the show, I think, 2 or 3 times now. It's Josh Sideshow Wilkinson. Dude, welcome back, man. It's been a while.
Thank you. Yeah, it has. Yeah, I've been settling into new life in the City of Angels. And it's the House of the Devils inside the City of Angels, I think, when I live with Reinforce and Bren.
I've seen some of those scary, like, 30-second videos and tweets.
They're not recommended.
At least, like, do it in the morning so that you've got some time to get, like, or go to like reddit.com/r/ibleach or something when you're done, and then you should be good. No nightmares.
Look at some pictures of puppies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. But it is, man, it's something else. It's like Frat House 2.0.
Yeah, the nicest way of saying it is it's creative.
There you go. Getting that creative outlet.
Exactly.
Well, let's jump right in here. And I actually had kind of an interesting, I don't know if it's an interesting question, but it's interesting to me. As your role as an analyst in Overwatch League, we obviously we kind of know what casters are trying to do. But the analyst desk kind of has changed and morphed a lot, especially since like the beginning of Overwatch League. And I was just really curious kind of what your personal goals are and what you're trying to kind of communicate from that analyst perspective in Overwatch League.
Yeah, it is a very interesting thing. It actually hits to the heart of what I've been thinking about for quite a while, really, since we came here. Is like, what are we attempting to achieve with the desk? I think there's 3 main goals is how I would try and break it down. In rough kind of order, it's narrative. So like being able to build up storylines, add gravitas to the games that require it. As in, if it's a big game, tell people why it's a big game, get them excited for it, or give them a reason to be invested in the game and want to watch it, and do the same thing for other storylines. Build up a team, give them some backstory, give them depth that people can sink their teeth into and want to see them continue. So that is what I would describe as like the narrative portion of it, to talking about the peaks and troughs of teams and looking at it kind of historically and building up the gravitas. And then secondly, I think it's about entertainment as well. So being able to, for example, that's why we have a lot of like the replay packages that we look over as well. So it's not just some dry people talking on the desk, like discussing the finer points of some strategy that nobody has a clue other than the absolute highest tier grandmasters. That isn't entertaining, and that isn't why people would want to tune in. So even for the games that aren't as good, not even like the lower level games, because some of those can be pretty close and therefore quite interesting and entertaining to see who will come out on top. But for some of the just straight blowout games, like when London was playing against Florida last week, then it's on the casters predominantly because they're taking up most of the game time, I think, but also on the analyst desk to bring the entertainment so that the viewers want to tune in and they want to see like what dumb shit is Bren up to today, or what's he going to say on the desk that's going to get everyone riled up. So that's the entertainment portion of it. And then the third thing would be education as well, which I think is what most people classically associate with the analyst desk, because we are analysts. We have a lot of knowledge to be able to give out. We could, if we wanted to, spend an hour breaking down every single game and properly VOD review it and break down every fight and tell you exactly what the turning points were. But that tends to be too dry to actually cover, and it's also just impossible within the 8-minute span. So you pick up on the things that you think will educate either a newer viewer, or you explain something cool that will stick in someone's mind, or you talk a little bit about the style of a team and give somebody an idea of what they're going to see when they move forward into the next half of the game or the next time they see this team play. So I think those are the 3 main things that the analyst desk is aiming to produce is narrative, entertainment, and education in different amounts depending on how good the raw game is itself and how much we need to either prop it up or just let it flow.
And the occasional lemon, right? Just the occasional
just as infrequently as possible, we will eat a lemon. Yeah.
Only for a good cause.
But that's the entertainment portion, right? As well as like you can throw silly things like that in there and they just kind of bounce around and
that was hilarious.
It was. Seeing Doa ravage a lemon like that, I've never seen somebody eat a fruit in such a barbaric way in my life.
It's like Jurassic Park type stuff for sure. I personally really enjoy the banter between Crumbs and Bren. I think I live for that a little bit, but it's really good. Let's talk about the league though. And one of the teams that have really been on my mind lately is the Boston Uprising. They've really seemed to kind of struggle since the beginning of stage 2. Where do you think their problems lie right now? Are they new problems that they didn't have in stage 1, or are they existing problems that certain factors made it that they weren't such a prevalent detail?
I think Boston Uprising are very much a bit of an enigma because coming into the league, they were all such unknown quantities, or they had all not performed at such a high level before, as in we'd seen them perform, and they were either on mediocre teams but decent players, or looked like mediocre players on mediocre teams. And so it just turned out that they really clicked coming into stage 1 and surprised a huge amount of people. So at some point, it seems reasonable to me that you would expect a downtick in performance, because the whole reason people go for proven names or championship rosters or championship names is because they've proven that they can do it before. They've proven that they can have success and be able to sustain it and have that consistency level, which is something that was always a big question mark coming in for Boston. And they've achieved much more than we thought they would in stage 1. But part of me thinks that this is just a natural downswing because the players don't have the experience to play and adapt at a high level and keep up that level of consistency and be able to change their entire style around whenever a new patch comes along and be able to unlearn everything that they've learned about being able to take engagements with, for example, a Dragon Blade, and then you have to learn completely different stuff because instead of a Mercy supporting you, you now have an Ana or a Lucio or something, or your Diva now is going to peel for the backline because you have to, there's so many different micro adjustments that Boston Uprising looked like they were a team where they had good players, but they needed a plan. And so when they had a plan in stage 1 and they were all on the same page, their timing was super crisp. They occasionally had big clutches coming out from the guys, like individual performance. But when things have got messier or when things have got faster pace in stage 2, they've fallen behind quite a lot. And I know this is all kind of very vague, but I actually don't know what you could exactly pin it down to. Like some people say it's because Mercy isn't out, so Dreamcasper isn't getting pocketed enough. I think that's, that's probably factors into it, but do I think that's the only issue for them? I don't think so, because Striker has also been not synced up as well with his main tank on the dives, and I feel like Note now has to play a little more passively rather than going in aggressively. There's a lot of different changes from stage 1 to stage 2, and part of being a championship player, as we see from a lot of these different rosters, is that you have experienced this before and you're able to adapt and roll with it and know kind of intuitively how to change. I think Boston's just lacking some of that experience.
Do you think, I'm glad you brought up Dreamcasper, because Dreamcasper has kind of been in stage 1, you could say was definitely in the running towards the top, if not at the top, with maybe Lynxer as the best Western DPS in Overwatch League, if not the world at the moment. Do you think that with these changes, would you put him up there? And B, would you change that assessment in this stage 2 scenario?
When you're talking about the best X player or whatever, or best player in the world, or best DPS player or something, I think you have to kind of categorize it a little more. You have to put a few more categories in there. So I think best DPS player to me doesn't really make that much sense when a lot of teams have split things very clearly between, like, they had a dedicated Tracer player or a dedicated Hitscan player and then a guy that played Genji or whatever. a lot of the teams broke it apart like that. And so it makes more sense to divvy it up like that. And some of the flex DPS players were playing predominantly Junkrat in that meta and stuff. So if we're talking about just like really solid Genji kind of Pharah players, which is what Dreamcasper and a lot of the guys like the one that springs to mind is Vic, but he was in no sense MVP candidate. Libero, Fleta, Linkser, guys like this. Then, yeah, I think Dreamcasper had the kind of performance where you would have to put him up with people way more notorious than he is. And what do I think the issue is? I'm not really sure. Again, it comes back to it's so much of a team game, Overwatch, that when you have metas that facilitate a star player in the same way as Dreamcasper was being facilitated, is that him being a star? Is that him, to some extent, right? You have to give him credit for being able to perform with the resources given to him, but you have to also take into account he was given tons of resources. Now, the guy on the team that was performing unbelievably and wasn't given any resources was Striker, because he was just being able to sync up with the tanks on these dives and absolutely wreck people, and his timing and his awareness was superb given the lack of resources. So it makes it more difficult to talk about Dreamcasper in that sense, because who else was given that kind of those kind of resources? And then when the resources fall apart, when the team isn't playing as well, obviously he's not going to look as good. So there's a lot of factors going into it. But yes, I would, in the most surface level, I wouldn't put Dreamcasper up there as one of the best Western DPSs in Stage 2.
The questions are just going to get harder here, Sideshow.
Let's go. More difficult.
I'm just kidding.
As long as you're fine with me adding more nuance, more caveats.
Well, I think that's the really important things here is I think a lot of people want to take Overwatch League analysis or competitive Overwatch analysis and find this really kind of black and white definition. What makes a player good? Yeah. What makes one not? Is. And, my job, I get to answer the questions sometimes, or ask the questions, and sometimes the worst way possible, just so that you can correct me and be like, well, actually, it's a lot more nuanced, because it really is.
It really is, yeah. And that kind of refers back to the analyst desk as well. It's like you need short, punchy things when you're trying to keep an audience entertained or something. And because you have such a wide variation in skill of the viewer, you have no idea really who you're talking to. Like on a Thursday, are there more bronze players watching? I don't know. On Saturday
Thursday is bronze day, actually.
Who knows? Yeah. Thursday is only bronze day if Bren is on the desk. I'll tell you that. Right? So,
okay, yeah.
No, so you never really know. Okay, so because the segments are smaller and everything, it has to be a little less nuanced. But the game is actually really deep and really about lots of little interactions happening all over the place. So, really, when you the deeper you break it down, the less black and white it gets, for sure.
So let's get really gray here and talk about the Dallas Fuel, because I feel like this is one of the biggest.
It was gray in terms of storm clouds and just general gloomy atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. But the Dallas Fuel obviously come from the Envious core. They augmented it with players like Seagull, now AKM. Thinking off the top of my head,
Rascal as well.
Rascal, yeah. So they've added quite a few different Custa, I think, was added either towards the end or afterwards. How can a team go from one of the best teams in the world over the span of like 2 years and one of the most well-respected teams, at the very least in the Western world? If you want to, break it up and be like, well, actually they, besides Apex Season 1, did they perform that great? Blah, blah, blah. How do you go from a team that was so successful and so dominant, and honestly, the way that they kind of piloted different strategies kind of showed the just different level that they were on, to a team right now that's fighting to stay out of the bottom 4. And even then, They're really only taking on teams right now that are either just above them in the standings or in those bottom 3.
All right, you ready? This is a doozy. This is a big one, because first we got to assess some of our historical stuff of what we think about when we think about Envious. Right? It was the pre-Owl era. If you look at the Western teams that were kicking around at that time, I have a personal theory that this triple shuffle that happened between Rogue and Misfits and LG towards the end of 2016.
Yeah,
it was supposed to make the teams much better. It was like when Misfits made the full Swedish lineup, Rogue made the full French lineup, etc. I think pretty much that screwed over a lot of the other competitors for Envious, because like teams like Rogue United went super ham on one specific strat and like built their team around that strategy. And Misfits just never found any success. And these were the other, and like NIP, the tank meta disappeared. So there were a lot of really good teams in Europe that fell off the edge of a cliff in 2017. And a lot of the other teams like Immortals and stuff only had very small peaks, and like Selfless. These were not, what I'm getting to here is that these were not Owl caliber or even top Apex caliber teams. Envious, even when they were at their peak in 2017, I think wouldn't break the top 5 in the world. It was just all solid Korean rosters above that. And then when you look at the shuffles that happened coming into the Overwatch League, these existing teams got better. So like Seoul Dynasty added a load more extra DPS players who are just phenomenal. NYXL improved their roster. London Spitfire kind of combined 2 of their rosters together and are now looking just insane. You got brand new teams like Philadelphia Fusion. The infrastructure all improved. So I think Envious are in a weird place where they were on top of a bit of a rubbish heap for a while. They were just the kings of the trash bags. If we look at some of what was happening in 2017. And then they have also suffered from being the holes in their roster being exploited, I think, because once you can catch up to Dallas Fuel in terms of the individual talent and the level of just basic teamwork that they had, which always managed to let them ride on top. They actually have always had a lot of holes in their roster. They've never been able to play Genji Tracer Dive. Their tanks were always super passive, and whenever they went to Apex, their tanks would just get rolled over because the Korean tanks were so much better. A lot of the tanks in the Overwatch League have improved massively since Envious were playing that well, and it's not the case anymore that you can have like a hard carry Tracer or a hard carry Soldier 76 or something. You need to be able to play a variety of strategies. So I also think that Dallas Fuel coming into it, having added 3 of their players with XQC, Custer, and who was the third person they added?
XQC, Custer, Seagull.
They added somebody else as well. Seagull, of course, yeah. I think with adding those 3 players, they kind of lost some of the identity, some of the core of what was making Envious so good. That was like their raw teamwork and the way that they were taking fights and stuff like this. The way that they were backing each other up at the right time. And so I think by trying to change, they tried the changes too dramatically and in some sense the wrong direction, and it has ended up biting them. So now I think this is a team that's starting to get its footing back because you have XQC who's playing really well. They're moving Seagull over to a diva role to have some more depth on the off tank so that their tank line in general is looking better. They seem to have figured out that Custer and Harry Hook in general work better, perhaps just for this stage, perhaps because of their Custer's calling, which is much more, dominant, authoritative than Chips Hyan, who's a very quiet player, despite the fact he's very skilled.
Sure.
But their DPS is still kind of all over the place because Effect is playing this like one-man army kind of style where he doesn't sync up with the dives as well as some of the other tracers in the league. Like some of the other tracers that are worse than him are performing much better because they have better sync with their team. It's not the case anymore that Effect can just run around and kill everybody, like when Tracer was just incredible in mid-2017. And then they still can't play Genji Tracer Dive particularly because now they've put the focus on AKM, who's come in and he's just like an upgraded Taimu. So a lot of weird stuff happening with Dallas Fuel, but all of these little pieces I think have come together to mean that they are now a mid-table team rather than a top-table team.
So do you think that they are a team right now with the staff that they have, that by the end of season 1, we should see them hanging out more towards the middle rather than kind of just barely peeking out over like Shanghai, Mayhem, Shock?
Yeah, I think the fact that they lost XQC for the entirety of stage 1 really hurt them, especially with tanks being as important as they are now. I think as soon as XQC came back in, you saw a massive improvement from the team. I mean, that was also with AKM coming back in as well.
Definitely.
So it was a double-pronged approach. But I don't know, unless they start utilizing Rascal a bit more, I think they're still going to suffer, because if you've just got Effect and AKM, unless Effect starts pulling out some crazy Genji, which theoretically ostensibly he has in his arsenal, but we've really never seen it, then I think they're kind of in a bad place because they don't have the coordinated aggression to be able to make up for the fact that their natural composition is so passive. So what I mean by this is that when you saw them play against, who were they playing against? Was that a Korean team or something? I think it was Seoul. It might have been. It was somebody anyway, and they were using
Seoul,
a Widowmaker on
Hanamura.
Yeah. Yes, it was. It was Seoul and Hanamura, and they would just put Fleder at the back and like the Fleder at the back on Widowmaker, and there's nothing that Dallas Fuel can do because they don't have aggressive players. They now have XQC and Effect, and in theory, they should have been able to coordinate and lock off a lot of that space, with even Mickey pushing up with them, but they just don't do that. I think the naturally aggressive players have the least tendency to coordinate out of anybody on the team, so they lack the ability to shut down and close space on teams that will abuse their passive playstyle, and they just like have AKM shooting at the back, and that's not going to work against most teams. You have to be aggressive if you've got AKM in your team, I think, in the same way that Rogue, like the rest of their team, closed space, and then AKM is just killing everybody.
My thanks to Sideshow for stopping by on the show today. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Sideshow Gaming. And of course, watch all of his awesome analysis on the Overwatch League desk over at overwatchleague.com. Tomorrow, I'm going to post part 2 of the interview with Sideshow. It's a little bit shorter. And also part 1 with an interview with professional pitcher and esports investor Trevor May. He's a good friend of mine. And we're talking a little bit about professionalism in esports as things kind of get a little bit crazy as far as the expectations of players in a league like Overwatch League. For tonight's matches, we have Seoul Dynasty taking on the Shanghai Dragons starting at 4 p.m. Pacific, the San Francisco Shock taking on the Dallas Fuel at 6 p.m. Pacific, and then the LA Valiant taking on the LA Gladiators at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Thanks again for everyone for watching. Make sure if you like this show, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you really like this show, head on over to patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. Every little bit helps us stay awake late at night to edit these shows to get them out to you as soon as possible. We really appreciate your support in that, of course. Go to overwatchleaguedaily.com and you can find links to everything there. My thanks again to Sideshow. Part 1, and I'll be back with Sideshow Part 2 and Trevor May tomorrow.